The second death, in 1882, was that of a solicitor's clerk who had been helping to organize the family archives. He too fell from the gallery. I suspect he stumbled upon the same truth that Edward later discovered. Philip's face had grown pale during this recitation, but his hand remained steady on the pistol. You cannot prove any of that. Those deaths were investigated and ruled accidental. Perhaps, but your brother's death will not be so easily dismissed. I have already sent word to Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, informing him of my suspicions and the location of this hidden chamber. If Dr. Watson and I fail to return to Baker Street by this evening, he has instructions to come here with a full complement of officers. Watson saw the calculation in Philip's eyes as he weighed this information against his options. The man's jaw tightened, and for a terrible moment, Watson was certain he intended to fire regardless of the consequences. "You are bluffing," Philip said at last. "I never bluff in matters of life and death." Holmes took a step forward, seemingly oblivious to the weapon pointed at his chest. "Consider your position carefully, Mr. Thornwood. If you kill us now, you will certainly hang for it. Lestrade knows we came here this morning. The household staff saw us enter. You cannot hope to conceal 2 more bodies and explain away 2 more convenient accidents. But if I let you walk out of here with those documents, I am ruined regardless." "Not necessarily." Holmes' voice softened almost imperceptibly, taking on a persuasive tone that Watson had rarely heard him employ. "The embezzlement charges are serious, but they are not capital offenses. As for the adoption, that is a matter of family history, not criminal law. You have lived as a Thornwood for 40 years. There are those who might argue you have earned the name, if not by blood then by long association." Philip's pistol wavered slightly. "You would offer me clemency? After what I have done? I offer you the chance to face justice with dignity, rather than compounding your crimes with additional murders. The choice, Mr. Thornwood, is yours." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity, broken only by the distant creaking of the old house settling around them. The pistol trembled in Philip's hand, his face contorting with the agony of impossible decision. Watson watched the man's eyes dart between Holmes, the documents, and the doorway behind him, calculating odds that grew more unfavorable with each passing second. The lantern flickered, casting grotesque shadows across the hidden chamber. And for one terrible moment, Watson was certain Philip would choose violence over surrender. Then, with a sound that was almost a sob, Philip lowered his weapon. "I never meant to kill him," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Edward was my brother in every way that mattered. We grew up together, shared everything. When he confronted me with those papers, I tried to make him understand that I had only taken what should have been rightfully mine. But he would not listen. He said he would expose everything, strip me of my name, my position, my very identity." Holmes stepped forward and gently removed the pistol from Philip's unresisting fingers, passing it to Watson before returning his attention to the broken man before them. "Tell me exactly what happened on the night of Edward's death. Leave nothing out." Philip slumped against the brick wall, his earlier composure completely shattered. "We argued in his study after dinner. He had found the adoption certificate that afternoon and spent hours searching through the old files, until he discovered the financial discrepancies as well. He was furious, more angry than I had ever seen him. He said I had betrayed everything our father stood for, that I was nothing more than a common thief wearing a gentleman's mask, and you followed him to the gallery. He stormed out of the study, saying he needed air to clear his head before deciding what to do. I pursued him, begging for another chance, promising to repay every penny I had taken. But Edward was implacable. He climbed to the gallery. He often walked there when he was troubled, and I followed." Philip's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. "We struggled. He tried to push past me, to return to his wife and tell her everything. I grabbed his arm, and he struck me. In the confusion, he stumbled against the railing. It gave way. I swear it simply gave way, and he fell. Watson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air of the abandoned wing. The railing gave way? But it appeared solid when we examined it. I repaired it that same night, before anyone could see the damage. The ironwork was old, weakened by decades of neglect. Edward's weight against it was enough to bend the supports. Philip looked up, his eyes haunted. "You must believe me. I did not push him. It was an accident, a terrible accident that I have relived every night since." Holmes regarded him with an expression that mingled skepticism with something that might have been pity. "And yet you concealed your struggle, repaired the evidence, and allowed the death to be ruled accidental. Those are not the actions of an innocent man overwhelmed by tragedy. They are the calculated measures of someone protecting himself from the consequences of his deeds. What choice did I have? If I confessed, everything would have been revealed, the adoption, the embezzlement, all of it. I would have lost everything, and for what? Edward was already dead. Nothing could bring him back. So instead you chose to terrorize his widow with threatening notes and attack his daughter on the stairs." Holmes' voice had grown cold, all trace of sympathy vanishing. "Do not insult my intelligence by claiming those were accidents as well." Philip's head snapped up, genuine confusion crossing his features. "I sent no threatening notes. And I certainly did not attack Helena. I was in my study all that night, working on the quarterly accounts. The servants can confirm it." Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes, seeing his own surprise reflected in his friend's sharp eyes. If Philip was telling the truth, and his bewilderment appeared entirely genuine, then someone else in Camden House had pushed Helena down the stairs and slipped that menacing message under Mrs. Thornwood's door. "This is most unexpected," Holmes murmured, his brow furrowing in thought. "If you are not responsible for the recent incidents, then we have been operating under a fundamental misapprehension. There's another player in this game, one whose motives and methods remain entirely obscure." Before anyone could respond, a woman's scream pierced the silence high, terrified and coming from somewhere in the main house. Watson's blood ran cold as he recognized the voiced daughter was Mrs. Thornwood. And she was screaming for her life. Holmes moved with a swiftness that belied his lean frame, pushing past Philip and racing down the dusty corridor toward the gallery door. Watson followed close behind, his revolver drawn and ready, his heart pounding with desperate urgency. The scream had ceased as abruptly as it began, leaving behind a silence that was somehow more terrifying than the cry itself. They burst through the gallery door and onto the narrow walkway overlooking the entrance hall. Below them, a scene of chaos was unfolding. Mrs. Thornwood lay crumpled at the foot of the main staircase, her dark dress spread around her like a pool of shadow, while a figure in pale clothing fled toward the rear of the house. "Watson, see to Mrs. Thornwood," Holmes shouted, vaulting over the gallery railing and dropping to the landing of the grand staircase with cat-like grace. He hit the ground running, pursuing the fleeing figure with a determination that Watson had witnessed many times but never failed to marvel at. Watson descended the stairs as quickly as he dared, reaching Mrs. Thornwood's side within moments. To his profound relief, she was conscious. Though clearly dazed, her hand pressed to a wound on her temple that bled freely but did not appear life-threatening. "Helena," Mrs. Thornwood gasped, clutching at Watson's sleeve. "It was Helena. She pushed me, tried to kill me just as she killed Edward." Watson's mind reeled at this revelation, but his medical training took precedence over his confusion. He helped Mrs. Thornwood to a sitting position, using his handkerchief to staunch the bleeding, while the sounds of pursuit echoed through the distant corridors of the house. Several minutes passed, minutes that felt like hours before Holmes reappeared, his hand firmly gripping the arm of Helena Thornwood. The young woman's earlier composure had vanished entirely. replaced by a wild-eyed fury that transformed her delicate features into something almost unrecognizable. She struggled against Holmes' grip, her pale hair disheveled and her dress torn from her flight through the house. "Unhand me," she shrieked. "You have no right. She is the murderess, not I. She killed my father for his money." Holmes propelled her into the entrance hall and forced her into a chair, positioning himself between her and the injured. Mrs. Thornwood, his gray eyes blazed with a cold fire that Watson had rarely seen the expression of a man who had been deceived and did not appreciate the experience. "The game is finished, Miss Thornwood," Holmes said, his voice cutting through her protests like a blade. "I confess you played it remarkably well. The torn nightgown, the tale of being pushed down the stairs, the accusation against your stepmother, all designed to divert suspicion from yourself. But you made several critical errors, and those errors have undone you." Helena ceased her struggling, her eyes narrowing with calculating hatred. "I don't know what you mean." "Then allow me to enlighten you." Holmes began to pace, his movements precise and controlled. "You claim to have been pushed from behind on the stairs, yet the tear in your nightgown indicated a downward grasping motion, the mark of someone who had torn their own garment while descending the stairs, not someone who had been attacked from above. You manufactured evidence to support a false accusation against your stepmother. That proves nothing. By itself, perhaps not. But consider it alongside the other inconsistencies in your story. You claim to have no memory of the incident, yet you remembered clearly the feel of a ring against your back, a ring you identified with remarkable precision despite the supposed confusion and terror of the moment. And then there is the matter of the threatening note sent to Mrs. Thornwood." Holmes produced the message from his pocket. "You were careful to use newspaper clippings and common materials, but you forgot one crucial detail. The fingerprint in the paste residue does not belong to your Uncle Philip, as I initially suspected. It belongs to you." Helena's face had grown increasingly pale during this recitation, but she attempted one final defense. "My fingerprints could have gotten on that paper innocently. I touch many things in this house. Not paper that was composed in secret and slipped under a door in the dead of night. The paste was still fresh when I examined it, no more than 12 hours old. And flour and water paste, Miss Thornwood, is remarkably effective at preserving fingerprint evidence." Holmes stopped pacing and fixed her with a penetrating stare. "But the most damning evidence is something I observed on my first visit to this house, though I did not understand its significance until now." Watson leaned forward, as captivated by Holmes' explanation as he had ever been. "Mrs. Thornwood mentioned that you have a private physician in Harley Street whom you consult regularly for your fainting spells. I made inquiries yesterday evening and discovered that this physician is not a general practitioner at all, but a specialist in diseases of the mind. You have been receiving treatment for a condition characterized by violent episodes and periods of lost time episodes that you have learned to conceal with remarkable skill." Helena's composure cracked at last, her face contorting with a mixture of rage and despair. "He was going to disinherit me," she hissed, all pretense of innocence abandoned. "My own father was going to declare me mentally unfit and place my inheritance in trust forever. He said it was for my own protection, but I knew the truth. She had poisoned him against me, convinced him that I was dangerous." Mrs. Thornwood struggled to her feet, supported by Watson's arm. "That is not true, Helena. Edward loved you. He only wanted to ensure you would be cared for after he was gone." "Cared for? Locked away, you mean? Treated like a child for the rest of my life while you spent my money and lived in my house." Helena's voice rose to a shriek. "I heard you discussing it with Philip. You were planning to commit me to an asylum the moment father was dead." Holmes shook his head slowly. "And so you decided to act first. You confronted your father on the gallery that night, after he had argued with Philip about entirely unrelated matters. In the struggle that followed, you pushed him over the railing to his death. He was going to destroy my life. What choice did I have? You had the choice to seek help, to accept treatment, to trust in the family that loved you despite your illness. Holmes' voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like sorrow. Instead, you chose murder, and when suspicion threatened to fall upon you, you attempted to frame first your stepmother and then your uncle for your crime. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. And moments later, Inspector Lestrade appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 uniformed constables. His sharp eyes took in the scene, the injured Mrs. Thornwood, the restrained Helena, and Holmes standing at the center of it all, and he nodded grimly. I received your telegram. Mr. Holmes, it seems I arrived just in time. Your timing is impeccable as always. Lestrade, Holmes gestured toward Helena. Miss Helena Thornwood, for the murder of her father Edward Thornwood, and the attempted murder of her stepmother Arabella Thornwood. You will find corroborating evidence in the east wing of this house, where her uncle Philip has been hiding documents that, while damning to himself, also provide crucial context for the family tensions that led to these crimes. As the constables moved to take Helena into custody, Philip Thornwood emerged from the corridor where he had apparently been watching the entire confrontation. His face was gray with shock and guilt, his earlier defiance completely extinguished. I had no idea, he whispered. I believed she was genuinely ill, but I never imagined she was capable of violence. When Edward fell, I assumed it was the result of our struggle, that I was somehow responsible. Holmes regarded him with an expression that mingled contempt with something approaching understanding. You are responsible, Mr. Thornwood, not for the murder, but for the climate of secrecy and deception that allowed it to occur. Your embezzlement, your hidden adoption, your desperate efforts to conceal the truth, all of these created the atmosphere of suspicion and fear in which Helena's illness flourished unchecked. Lestrade stepped forward. I'll be needing a full statement from you as well. Mr. Thornwood, the matter of the financial irregularities will have to be addressed, regardless of the murder charges. Philip nodded wearily, offering no resistance as a constable took his arm. I understand. I have been running from the truth for too long. Perhaps it is time to face it at last. As the various parties were led away, Watson helped Mrs. Thornwood to a chair, his medical training reasserting itself now that the immediate danger had passed. The wound on her temple was superficial, as he had initially assessed, and would heal without permanent damage. How did you know, Holmes? Watson asked, turning to his friend. When did you realize that Helena was the true culprit? Holmes sank into a chair opposite Mrs. Thornwood, his angular features showing the fatigue that always followed the resolution of a particularly demanding case. I suspected from the moment I examined her torn nightgown. The direction of the tear was inconsistent with her account of being pushed from behind, a small detail, but significant. However, I could not be certain until I had eliminated the other possibilities. Philip's guilt seemed so obvious, Watson admitted. The adoption, the embezzlement, his presence in the house on the night of the murder. Precisely, it was too obvious. Someone with Helena's intelligence would have recognized that her uncle made an ideal scapegoat. By accusing her stepmother directly, she drew attention away from herself, while knowing that any investigation would eventually uncover Philip's secrets and shift suspicion to him. Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin. It was an elegant plan, I must confess. Had she not made the error with the nightgown and the fingerprint, she might well have succeeded. Mrs. Thornwood looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. I loved her as my own daughter. I never knew, never suspected, that she harbored such hatred for me. The hatred was born of illness, not malice, Holmes said gently. Helena has been suffering from a progressive mental condition for years, one that distorted her perceptions and amplified her fears. In her mind, you were a genuine threat to her future. The tragedy is that with proper treatment, her illness might have been managed. Instead, it was hidden and denied until it consumed her entirely. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the morning's revelations pressing down upon them. Outside, the gray winter sky had begun to clear, pale sunlight breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. Watson thought it a fitting metaphor. The darkness that had shrouded Camden House was finally lifting, allowing truth to illuminate its long-hidden secrets. Later that evening, Watson and Holmes sat in their familiar chairs at Baker Street, the fire crackling cheerfully in the grate. The day's events had left Watson exhausted, but Holmes appeared energized, his gray eyes bright with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. "There is one thing I still do not understand," Watson said, setting aside the brandy Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully provided. "You mentioned that Edward Thornwood had discovered the truth about Philip's adoption and embezzlement. If Helena killed him before he could reveal this information, how did Philip know that his secrets were in danger?" An excellent question, and one that speaks to the complex web of relationships in that household. Holmes reached for his pipe, packing it with tobacco from the Persian slipper. Philip did not know the full extent of what Edward had discovered. He only knew that his brother had been behaving strangely and spending unusual amounts of time with the family archives. When Edward died, Philip assumed the worst and immediately moved to secure the incriminating documents in the hidden chamber of the East Wing. So he was protecting himself from a threat that had already been eliminated. Precisely. The irony is that if Philip had simply done nothing, the documents might never have been found. His very efforts to conceal them drew attention to their existence. Holmes struck a match and lit his pipe, blue smoke curling around his sharp features. It is a common pattern among criminals. Their attempts to cover their tracks often create the very evidence that condemns them. Watson shook his head in wonder. And what will happen to Helena now? She will be examined by physicians and almost certainly found unfit to stand trial. She will spend the rest of her life in an institution for the criminally insane, a fate she feared so greatly that she killed to prevent it, only to ensure its inevitability through her actions. Holmes' expression grew somber. "It is a tragedy in the classical sense, Watson. Helena was undone by the very qualities she possessed in abundance: intelligence, determination, and a fierce desire for self-preservation. And Philip? He will face charges of embezzlement and fraud, though I suspect the courts will show some leniency given his cooperation and the extenuating circumstances of his adoption. The Thornwood shipping business will be sold to pay restitution, and Mrs. Thornwood will inherit whatever remains of the estate." Holmes exhaled a stream of smoke toward the ceiling. "She is a resilient woman. I believe she will rebuild her life, though the scars of this experience will never fully heal." Watson gazed into the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker. "You know, Holmes, when Mrs. Thornwood first came to us, she said she did not believe in ghosts, that she believed in human evil. She was right, in a way. The curse of Camden House was never supernatural. It was simply the accumulation of human secrets, human fears, and human failings, passed down through generations until they finally erupted in violence." Holmes nodded slowly, his pipe forgotten in his hand. "Every house has its secrets, Watson. Every family has its hidden shamas and unspoken truths. The difference is that most families find ways to acknowledge these truths before they become toxic. The Thornwoods chose concealment over confrontation, and they paid the ultimate price for that choice. Do you think Mrs. Thornwood will remain at Camden House?" "I doubt it. The memories there are too painful, and the locals will always associate the property with tragedy and death." Holmes rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the London street below. "No, I suspect she will sell the house and start fresh somewhere else, somewhere untainted by the past. It is what I would do in her position." Watson joined him at the window, watching the evening fog roll in from the Thames. The city was settling into its nightly routine, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in a grim house in Camden Town. life would go on, as it always did, and the story of the Thornwoods would fade into memory, becoming just another tale of mystery and murder in the annals of criminal history. "Well, Holmes," Watson said at last, "I suppose I should begin writing up this case for my records. Have you any preference for a title?" Holmes turned from the window, a faint smile playing across his features. "I leave such literary decisions entirely in your capable hands, my dear Watson. Though I would suggest something that captures the essential nature of the case, the hidden truths that festered behind closed doors, the secrets that proved more deadly than any ghost or curse." Watson nodded thoughtfully. "The Secret of Camden House. Yes, I think that will do nicely." Holmes clapped him on the shoulder and returned to his chair, reaching for the stack of correspondence that had accumulated during their absence. Already his mind was turning to other matters, other puzzles waiting to be solved. But Watson lingered at the window a moment longer, thinking of a grieving widow, a tormented young woman, and a house that had kept its secrets for far too long. In the end, he reflected, it was not the house that was cursed, it was the people within it, trapped by their own fears and lies until the only escape was tragedy. And perhaps that was the most chilling lesson of all, that the greatest horrors were not supernatural, but profoundly, terribly human. The fog continued to thicken outside, wrapping Baker Street in its familiar gray embrace. Inside, the fire crackled and Holmes rustled through his papers, already absorbed in some new puzzle. Watson turned from the window and took up his pen, ready to commit another adventure to paper, another testament to the remarkable mind of Sherlock Holmes and the darkness that lurked in the hearts of men. The Secret of Camden House was closed. But somewhere in London, Watson knew another mystery was waiting to be born.